Call the meeting of this planning commission to order, the September 21, 2022. If staff could call roll, please.
Ryan Pearson,
Here.
Paul Wagaman,
Oh, that's me. Yeah, present.
Philip Combs,
Present.
Lynn Larson, Brian Parsons,
Here.
Robert Estrada,
Here.
Don Daniels.
Here,
You have reached quorum.
great. Before us, we have the minutes of July 20th, 2022. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Larson made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Estrada. Any questions, concerns, changes? Hearing or seeing, Mr. Parsons? Oh, no, sorry. I see a little mouse going across and it looked like the hand was up.
My apologies.
Sorry, no problem. Seeing or hearing no comments or concerns. All those in favor by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Any abstentions? Hearing none. Minutes passed as written. Thank you. Any changes to our agenda tonight?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. At this time, we'll open up public comment. Anyone wishing to speak to fellow commissioners on any subject or willing to do so? Seeing none in our audience tonight, is there anyone online tonight?
No, Mr. Chair.
Seeing or hearing and no people online, we'll close the public comment at this time. We do not have a public hearing. We do not have unfinished business. We move right to new business of the 2023 Comprehensive Plan Amendment Docket Introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And welcome back, everyone. It's been a few months since we all saw each other, so glad to have you all back. Give me 1 second and I'll be able to get you. Maybe I'll just do it like this. Sorry, rusty. Okay. So it seems like you just finished the 2022 comprehensive plan amendments, but here we are with the 2023 docket. So just to remind the commission very quickly, the process is there is a period of time, usually about a month, where the general public can submit applications for whether it's a text change in the comprehensive plan or a rezone to their property, but they can submit an application to amend our comprehensive plan and zoning map. And at the same time, the city may develop suggested applications as well. And then that is compiled into what's called the docket list. And so tonight before you is the first cut of that list for you to consider. Next meeting, there will be a public hearing on this list. And this is not a substantive review of any of these. This is simply the initial, do you want to include it on the list or not at all for future review? So this year, we actually have 8 that have been submitted. So I'll walk through them in just a moment. But as I mentioned, next meeting will be a public hearing, and then presumably the meeting after that, unless you want to have more time, you would be taking action on a recommendation up to the city council, whether to include all of these items or some of them in the docket for full consideration. There is now a website open for specifically the comprehensive plan and long range planning items. So if you were to go to the City of Lakewood's website and just go to the sub list long range dash planning, you would be able to see that and find information about the 2023 comprehensive plan amendment cycle on that at that page. So as I mentioned, there were 4 private and 4 public for a total of 8 applications that have been submitted. The first 4 that's in organization wise is the private, and the second 4 are the public applications. I'll walk through those with you tonight, but if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me and we'll take the time you need. So the first is an application to rezone a single parcel, and you'll see that star there where it's located. This is at 8821 John Dower Road Southwest. It is currently zoned MF1, multifamily 1, and the request is to rezone it to commercial 1. As you can see by the coloring on the map below the text, that is the zoning map for the city. And so it is surrounded by MF1, multifamily 1, and then adjacent or roughly adjacent to it, you'll see residential 3, residential 4, and neighborhood commercial 2. So there are no properties in the vicinity that are commercial 1 zoning. And this is a single zone, so it actually should be considered a site-specific rezone with its own process by Lakewood Municipal Code. So this is here for your consideration whether or not to include it in the docket list. The second application, also private, is from a developer looking to rezone a total of 3 parcels. They are right next to the downtown sub-area plan boundary, as you'll see on the map. And the request is to rezone them from multifamily 3 to the downtown's zone central business district. And the main reasoning behind this is in order to increase the density allowed on the property, as well as allow for the use of the development code within Title 18B that governs the downtown. Oops, sorry. So as you see on this map below, I'll get there. The lighter blue is the central business district zone. It's a slight difference, but this is a different blue. That is residential 4. The circle is for those 3 parcels, and they are the multifamily 3. And then directly to the south of them is multifamily 1. So this is a multiple parcel request, so it's not a site-specific rezone. But if the city or the planning commission were wanting to look at doing something in addition to these 3 being zoned differently, that is an option as well. This is the application as it stands right now.
Excuse me, one question by Mr. Estrada.
Are we privy to the reasoning? Why do they want to change these parcels? I mean, the first one at John Dower, for example, why would he want to change it to commercial? No other commercial in the area, but he wants to go commercial. Why?
That is a building contractor's business that has been there since before incorporation. And so it is a non-conforming use as of right now. The person who owns the business is retiring. And so presumably they are thinking in terms of selling for future use by someone else. They would want to have no non-conforming use on that parcel. However, Lakewood's municipal code is very explicit that non-conforming uses can continue even if they change ownership.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Larson.
At what point are we waiting until you describe all of these before we discuss any one of them, or do you want us to discuss them as we go?
You can answer, you can ask right as we go along. That'd be
Okay.
good.
I would just like to, I don't really know what works long-term for the city. This is, of course, spot zoning is not usually desirable. This particular business has been, since it was constructed, a contractor's business. It was built by a guy named Bob Bartran in the early 70s.
Mhm.
And then it's been a contractor's building ever since. It's more like the rest of the zoning around it, but it's always been residential in nature.
Correct.
So I don't know what it means to change the zone per se, except it might give a broader context to what other commercial uses might be able to go into the property into the future besides contractor services. So I don't know the benefit of actually making it a zoning. But it has been there for a long time, and I'm personally aware of that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Ewer.
at the public hearing, each one of these prospective proponents will be giving their reasons why they're pursuing it. So I would kind of hold off and wait to hear what they have to say, and then they're going to give you, many of them will give you a long history of the zoning. And I also know the county zoning behind this as well. And as we go through each one of these, that history has relationships with any future recommendations. So just be patient, and we go through the process. You'll learn more about each one of these.
Okay, great.
Works for me.
Thank you. Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Ms. Spear.
So any other questions on the second one? This one, as I mentioned briefly, but the intent here is to redevelop these 3 parcels at a higher density. And the desire of the developer, as expressed in their application, is to be able to take advantage of the higher heights as well as the parking requirements and the development code that's available within the downtown. The third is a request to rezone 3 parcels. located at roughly 5820 112th Street Southwest. They are currently actually some split zoning, as you'll see on the map, but they are currently zoned mixed residential 2, and the request is to change that to open space and recreation 2. This is the Racket Club. And back right before I started with the city in 2015, this application was made where it was already open space recreation. They asked for the change to mixed residential because at the time they were thinking to develop those parcels in order to be able to then have those revenues for operations of their club. Now they have changed tack and they are hoping that these can come back to OSR in order to allow them to create 6 new tennis courts for kids and family use. The fourth private application is from LASA, which is, I always forget their acronym, but Living Access Services, I believe. In any case, they are roughly downtown. So you'll see the map shows 59th and Gravelly Lake Drive here. But these are 4 parcels that LASA owns. And the intent here is to create 25 permanently low-income housing units between 1 and 3 bedrooms. And this is part of a 4-phase master plan for what they're calling Gravelly Lake Commons. So they are an affordable housing and social services provider, and they are intending to develop property immediately next to their office in order to have services and housing right next to each other. So as you see here on these, on the lower map is the coloring of the zoning, but there's the 4 parcels. 2 of them are in arterial commercial. 2 of them are in residential 4. And then there's public institutional right next door. What they're asking for is to change this to neighborhood commercial 2. Thank you. Living Access Support Alliance. Okay. This is just demonstrating for you the various allowed uses between those 3 zones in question. So residential 4, arterial commercial, and neighborhood commercial 2. You'll see there the 3 numbers there in that top square. That's the dwelling units per acres allowed. So NC2 is the highest. And then you'll see either permitted or conditionally permitted, or the little line means not permitted. Those are the various uses allowed in each zone. This is a map down here that shows how this 4 parcel area has been developed to date and is intended to be developed in the future. Phases 1 and 2 are basically underway or completed. Phase 3 is what is being talked about with this new project. And then phase 4 is a future project, but both 3 and 4 are intended over time by LASA to become affordable housing units. Then jumping to the 4 public or city instigated, initiated applications. The first is to take a look at what is allowed essentially in the commercial zones within the city in order to comply with RCW 35A21-430, which says that a code city, which is what Lakewood is, shall not prohibit transitional or permanent supportive housing in any zones in which residential units or hotels are allowed. And below, you'll see just these 2 tables are showing with X's where either the residential, or whether hotels or residential uses are allowed in either one of the, or any of the zones. And then the second table is permanent supportive housing and then transitional housing. Transitional housing, another word for emergency shelter, just to be clear. So if you start with where hotels and residential uses are allowed, and then you come down to the bottom, the only area where you don't follow already in Lakewood 35A21-430 is in the commercial zones. And so in C1, C2, and C3, hotels and residential uses are currently allowed, but they do not allow permanent supportive housing or transitional. So this is where there would be a potential change to the city's zoning. And down at the bottom, there is the ability for a city to provide requirements and occupancy, spacing, and intensity requirements for the permanent supportive housing and transitional housing. The 6th Amendment is just a quick change to land use policy that's there in the comprehensive plan already. It at one point said that federal funds had to be used to assist with relocation assistance for people who are displaced as a result of city construction or development projects. No longer is that federal fund requirement. It can be any type of funding. So we just wanted to make that clear. The 7th is a request by the city to rezone this little parcel down here with the turquoise outline. That is currently a residential R3 zoned parcel. It is immediately adjacent to Wards Lake Park. And this has already been purchased by the city. The intent is to expand Wards Lake Park to use that parcel as well. And so this is just asking that it be rezoned to OSR1 like the rest of the park in order to continue that development. The last application for the third time, we're talking Western State Hospital. This master plan update process has been happening for a number of years now, and we truly are toward the end of that process now. The hearing examiner issued his final decision on the new master plan on August 30th. There has been an application by DSHS for reconsideration on several items, and the city actually supports what they've requested the reconsideration about. But by next summer, process will be done. And once it is, we'll just be making some edits to the comprehensive plan and its maps to make sure that the new master plan is reflected within that. So where we sit, as I mentioned before, Planning Commission will hold a hearing on the docket, not the substantive content of any of them, taking action on October 19th, and then it moves on to City Council to take a look at that docket and finalize it. Next winter and into next year, we'll be taking a look at this through the normal comprehensive plan review process. So any questions on any of that?
Mr. Estrada.
Does the city at this time have any permanent supportive housing or transitional housing?
Very little. Do you want to answer that as well, Mr. Buer?
We're supposed to have regulations in place that deal with transitional housing. It was intentionally left out so as to give the city council and the city some flexibility and ability to negotiate what those rules and regulations would be in the event we received an application for transitional housing. So we may soon get something in place for the Candlewood Suites being changed from a hotel to a permanent supportive housing facility. And under the state's rules, we're supposed to provide opportunities for this. Now, so there's a piece to this that's very important, and that is you can control the siting and location and density. I suspect those issues will come up as we go through the process because you don't want to see hotels, one right after the other, converted into transitional or permanent supportive housing. Internally, we've had also some discussions about the fact that many of the hotels and motels are found along the I-5 corridor. And is that a good thing to place all permanent supportive and transitional housing in those areas? So I do think that some level of spacing is something that we're going to talk about. Candlewood Suites is a very easy conversion because many of the units already have kitchens and facilities. And it's a little bit difficult under the rules and regulations for hotels and motels because people can live there for longer than 30 days to call them out differently for permanent supportive housing. So these are issues that we will wrestle with extensively throughout the year as we go through this. Expect Low Income Housing Institute to participate because they do have a desire to convert that to permanent supportive housing. Neighborhood in the area is watching this, so expect them to also wish to participate. We are also in the process of investigating the operations of Aspen Court, looking at tours. It's also owned by Lehigh, which is located on Hosmer Street. That is transitional housing, I believe, to be converted to permanent supportive housing. City of Lakewood did, quote unquote, purchase, I believe, 10 rooms at that facility. Again, lots of questions and more to follow.
Mr. Larson.
What's the time span that we have to comply with the RCW? So relatively recent.
Well, we're
RCW.
supposed to have done it already, but we haven't. My position is they really can't move forward to operate this as a permanent supportive housing to have rules in place.
Indeed.
So we have the rules in place most likely by May, June of this year, next year.
And then what's the ultimate penalty if we don't comply?
Well, Lehigh will sue and they will win.
Thank you.
I mean, that's a real short answer. I'm not trying to be
That's good.
But that's the truth of the matter.
That Candle, what's it called? Candlewood?
Candlewood Suites, it's on the
Yep.
corner of 112th and Pack Highway.
So they do have families that live there that have students that go to a Clover Park school district. We have donated at holiday time bicycles for the youth, and we've had to make several deliveries there. I thought it was kind of awkward to have an address, and I kept driving by for a resident, and I kept driving by there. So
Housing is so short for low-income groups that many of the hotels are actually providing for apartment-style living, even though that technically it's probably not allowed. We have some real issues at the Western State Inn on South Tacoma Way. In 100th, there's been some discussion about using business license provisions to close it. We haven't gotten there yet because I haven't had time to pursue it. But the calls for service are extensive. And I expect that as we go through this discussion, we'll also have some discussion about using conditional licensing for permanent supportive housing, because even if you're a nonprofit, you're still required to get a business license. We have attached conditions and operations before. So those are some things that, also to keep in mind that the city updated its public nuisance rules and regulations. And it's much different than it used to be. It gives the city a lot more authority in the event that something like this goes awry. And that was done on purpose.
thank you. No other, Mr. Larson?
Are we seeing any significant level of crime coming from these hotels that are allowing for longer stays and with families in them?
I don't know.
It doesn't seem
I
noticeable to me, but
I don't know specifically. I'm sure I can get calls for service data. There have been significant issues on Hosmer Street, but I'm not sure it's directly related to Lehigh's operation. It may be related to a whole series of issues that are specific to Hosmer. Those are some of the discussions I would like to have with Lehigh as we move forward with their request.
Great, thank you.
thank you.
See no other hands up, so we'll move to number 2 under new business, the 2044 Lakewood population and unemployment growth targets.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this was before you, I think, just as a status update a couple of times this year, but I don't want to break down to when the dinosaurs came, but give you a little bit of a historical background. Every 10 years or so, there's a regional process to create what are called the multi-county planning policies. And as part of that process, there is also a aggregate growth assigned to the 4 counties within the Puget Sound Regional Council, including Pierce County. Over the last 12 to 18 months, that number has been talked about, negotiated about, and you've seen, I think, correspondence that Lakewood provided to the Pierce County Regional Council when they talked about this in Pierce County about how much growth, both population and job-wise, the city is able to realistically plan for between now and 2044. That process has now completed. And so, oops, what did I do? Here we are. That process is now completed, and the Pierce County Council took action with its Ordinance 2022-126S to adopt the numbers you see below for Lakewood. This is in a process where it's being ratified by all of the local governments. The City of Lakewood Council took action to ratify a few weeks ago, and by the end of the year, these will be the finalized formal numbers. So there are actually 3 numbers here because they provide both a population target and a housing unit target. And there's an assumption of somewhere about 2.5 people per household in the numbers. So if you do the rough math, you'll see how that works out. But what this is showing is that by 2044, Lakewood's target for population is 86,792 people. And if you look at the 2020 to 2044 number of people to grow, that turns into 23,180 people. Jumping over to what that means for housing units, again, about 2.5, a little less than that per housing unit is assumed. We're talking about 9,714 homes of some kind, residential, single family detached, all the way up to an apartment, whatever that is the number that we're supposed to be planning for. Employment, same idea. So you have the target of 39,735 by 2044. That's the number of jobs within the city of Lakewood. And that means an increase of about 9,865 jobs over the next 24 years. If you compare that just really quickly to the two big sub-area plan processes that have happened in 2018, the downtown sub-area plan was adopted, and then in 21, the station district one was. There were targets within those two sub-areas as well. And you'll see that when you add those two sets of numbers together, about 35% of the planned housing growth is planned for already within those two sub-areas. Not to say they couldn't take more, not to say they might end up taking less when you see development on the ground, but the plan is that they would take about 35% of the housing units and 87% of the jobs. So you'll see the numbers there by the sub-area name in each column. Quite a bit of the growth for jobs is here in the downtown, but both population and job growth within the Lakewood Station District is listed as pretty significant for that spot. So any questions on those?
Mr. Wagaman.
What does the asterisk mean?
Why did I do that? I think it's because there was a little glitch in the calculation at one point to say that the number of units in the station district was a little bit different. There were two places, there were two different numbers. And so I apologize, I missed the qualifier below the table.
It's on the notes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larson.
What's our process for tracking this on a year-by-year basis so that we see what our progress towards goal?
There's a couple of different things that happen on an annual basis. The city tracks the number of permits that are coming in, both for lot development and housing unit production. The economic development manager does track job growth as well. But then also we have within these two sub areas a process by which we just wrapped this up earlier this summer. The downtown this year had a sub area plan review every 2 years. Lakewood Station next year, they will have that process done as well. So that's an idea of here's the plan, those policies that were adopted, here's the development regulations that apply within that area. Are they showing out of the last period of time to be starting to get us on the trend to where we're going to hit this number by 2044? So there's at least 3 different levels where that happens.
Yes, Mr. Larson.
So the study, if it were done 2 years ago, and I think that's reasonable that to project that, if it were done 2 years ago, would the most recent 2 years of growth be on track to accomplishing these goals already? Do we have any recent history that shows how this will actually work?
It has not gone on a straight line track. And with the COVID restrictions on activity of all kinds, including residential construction and employment growth, we haven't seen it take off in this nice, beautiful picture.
That's fair.
So there's being assumptions made that things will pick up now that the economy is
I
starting to
withdraw
open
the
up.
question.
Yeah, later this summer, the city council requested that we do an annual department report. As a part of that report, we compared the growth rates in housing of Lakewood with other cities over 12 years. Lakewood was the lowest. And there's a variety of reasons for that. We have lots of limitations that other cities do not have. I think, as I recall, it was about 600 units over 12 years. And many other cities our size we're doing 1,000, 1,200, 2,000 units, but they have large open fields and other opportunities. We don't have that. So because we're an infill city and do not have any infrastructure that we own ourselves, do not own any power facilities, it's much more limiting. So yeah, we'll play the game that PSRC wants us to play, and we'll continue to monitor.
It'll never be a straight line
No.
because there are economic aberrations all the time, whether it's COVID or the coming recession or whatever.
And in addition to that, you may have a large development like Lakewood Landing, which is planned a 30-acre multi-phase development that would be mixed use. So residential as well as employment growth on that one spot that may be flat for a long time, and suddenly you see this jump because it opens, that kind of thing as well.
All right, seeing no hands up, I don't think, okay, on the line. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to the 2024 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Review Process Introduction under new business.
Thank you. Okay, and so I will apologize to you many times over the next year because this is going to get confusing and frustrating, I'm sure. We will have over the next year, and then this process goes through 24, 3 different significant land use efforts in front of you at the same time. And so I will try, Karen will try, Mr. Buer will try to keep this very clear which lane we're talking each time each one of these topics comes up. But the 2024 comprehensive plan process is going to be much larger, much more involved than what we just went through for 2023. It is a statutorily required full review of everything in the city's comprehensive plan and also its development regulations related to land use and planning. So it's going to be from bottom to top, left to right, the entire plan being looked at. There may not be changes to all of it, but it has to be reviewed. There will be significant public outreach and hopefully input. There will be significant stakeholder communications, working, for instance, with the utilities that provide services here in the city, interest groups that of whatever ilk. It will be talking to much more than just Community and Economic Development Department. You may have representatives here in front of you from the police department, for instance, to talk about whether they're talked about in the comprehensive plan. So this is a much different animal than what we just talked about for the 23 process. Having said that, some of you have seen this little graphic on the right, but essentially what we're doing is saying, okay, City of Lakewood, you've got your development regulations and your comprehensive plan. They are supposed to be consistent with those upper 3 levels. So the Growth Management Act, the multi-county planning policies, and the countywide policies. Consistent does not mean exactly the same. It means in keeping with and not in conflict with. So you may have different shades of pink or different shades of green, but if they're all close to the central policy that's set by the Growth Management Act, ultimately, you're going to be okay. Part of the reason this is required is to make sure that the state is comfortable providing funding to transportation projects here within the city of Lakewood. The rule is there, and that's kind of the teeth that you'll hear about with this whole process, is if a comprehensive plan is not consistent with the Growth Management Act and it is legally challenged and found to be not consistent, then funding is lost for transportation projects. There is also a website for this. So at any time, if you would like to, or any member of the public would like to go and learn more about this and how they can engage, it's cityoflakewood.us/24 periodic review. And there's lots of information as well as an invitation to get involved. There are 6 basic steps that we're going to follow. This is the work plan that you see here in graphic form between now and mid 2024. So this is as I said, 18 to 24 month process. We're setting up the work plan now. We're going to begin the community outreach and engagement process. We do hope to have some type of an actual advisory committee working and providing feedback up to you. Also figuring out the city and county collaboration and those utilities again. Looking at the existing plan and regulations, that will start this fall because there's a couple of checklists and other guidance documents that we've been provided by the state and the PSRC that we can use as our sounding board to see what is okay and what needs actual change. And then we'll begin the process of creating new documents into next year. Most of next year, that process will happen. We are debating internally, and you're welcome to provide your feedback on this, whether to try to bring you pieces of this over time versus one gigantic public hearing process over the entire thing. And maybe that'll become clear as we start to really get into this, what makes more sense. But of course, you're more than welcome to tell us how you'd prefer that to happen. There will also be the environmental review through SEPA, and then the Department of Commerce and the Puget Sound Regional Council both review what's the draft plan and provide feedback back to the city and approval on the ultimate product. Just really quickly, this is the type of things that will be looked at per the checklist that the Department of Commerce provides. So on the left, you'll see all these different areas have to be covered within your comprehensive plan and addressed per the checklist requirements. On the right, you'll see all of the different development regulation sections that we have to take a look at and make sure are okay. Toward the bottom, you'll see there is a need to have tribal participation addressed. And so that will be something that we'll be talking about as well. Left-hand side of this page, you'll see the current table of contents for the comprehensive plan.
On the right, you'll see a very first draft, certainly subject to change, reorganization. And this is in order for the comprehensive plan to be organized where you'll see nothing but policies at the start of it. And then all of the technical information are included in appendices that can be updated separate from the comp plan going forward. So this is kind of a technical attempt to make it easier to do this in the future. Mentioned the public participation. This is going to be, again, a large, robust effort. Those little tick boxes here down the center of the page, you'll see quite a few right now anticipated ways we're going to do this using Lakewood 311, direct mail, in-person meetings out in the community, not just here, Zoom sessions and hybrid accessibility to meetings, outreach to groups and stakeholders, the meetings that will be here as well as at the city council over the next 2 years. And then looking for input from anybody and everybody as we go through the process. Then we have 60 days prior to adoption to get this done. The final drop dead date is December 31 of 2024. So that's why you see on that work plan, we're trying to wrap up by mid-year in order to be able to, if there's any hanging chads, if you will, do something by the end of the year and get it done. One of the things that is going to be a big focus this time around is housing, because the state legislature has done a number of things to amend what's required for housing planning since the last time this was done. And so not only are you saying, we just looked at the growth targets, but not only is it you have to plan for this many people, period, it's now you have to plan for this many that are at 0 to 30% of area median income, this many that are 30 to 50, 50 to 80, 80 to 100 and above. So it's a lot more detailed than it has been in the past. And there are also requirements to look at historical discrimination, whether it's redlining in the zoning, whether it's anti-displacement issues, meaning if you redevelop an area, what happens to those that are there right now? How are they helped to continue on in a good way? And then also taking a look at different types of housing be allowed. So not just single family detached as the only use allowed in a residential zone, but expanding that to allow other types of housing as well. I'm being very crude in how I describe this, but this will all become very clear to you over the next couple of meetings. I just mentioned a little bit of this, that racially disparate impacts, meaning people of different color or ethnic backgrounds being treated differently, which has happened historically with land use and planning. I'm trying to correct those errors of the past as best we can. And also looking at anti-displacement, and that is a very difficult issue. Many of you are involved in some way with economic development, real estate development, and understand that there's only 1 acre of land and you only can have so much on it, and what happens to what was there before. So that'll be an issue to talk about. So once more, a little focus on housing. There's going to need to be analysis made of the capacity of land that's available for housing within the city. We've done some of that work already, but we'll need to refresh it probably. Take a look at infrastructure and land use changes to support housing. Looking at things like ADUs, the multifamily tax exemption program, other funding options that might be available. Looking at manufactured homes, mobile home parks, as something that actually is to be encouraged as an affordable housing tool. Talking about parking, which has been a topic for you and the city council for the last 2 years. And then we just talked about this earlier, also the permanent supportive housing and transitional housing being allowed. The other things that we have done at City of Lakewood optionally are these sub areas, and we've talked about these as well already tonight, but there's currently 3 in place: the downtown, the Lakewood Station, and then the Tillicum sub area plan was actually adopted back in 2011, if you remember, when we looked at this and updated it just in terms of status as part of this last comp plan cycle. But all of these are also part of the big comprehensive plan review. The downtown and the Lakewood ones are obviously recent enough, and they're going through their own process anyway for periodic updates, but the Tillicum one is out of date. And so we'll be making more significant change there. Puget Sound Regional Council, in addition to the Department of Commerce, as I mentioned, do review. And we do tonight have one of the representatives from PSRC to come and talk to you about this a little bit, so I won't jump too far into detail, but essentially they are considered what's called the Regional Transportation Planning Organization, as well as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the 4 counties within the PSRC's area. And so they take a look at the comp plan as well to see if it, again, follows the rules in order to be qualifying the jurisdiction for transportation funding that goes through Puget Sound Regional Council. So I started out with an apology. I'll throw it at you again. This is going to get confusing, I think, but we will do our best to keep these separate for you and try to clarify each time what are we talking about. In that email that I sent to the Planning Commission about a week ago, I tried to just very generally say the 23 process is the city has asked for changes and private property owners have asked for changes, and that's the focus of the review period. 2024's process is this required by state law, everything front to back, much more involved process. And so the order of magnitude is going to be different. With that, I'm sorry, one more thing. What we're going to do is for the rest of this year and into next year, each meeting for the foreseeable future, we're going to try to focus on a particular topic to kind of bring you up to speed on why and what may need to change. We won't have the actual amendments yet, but just try to say housing, we got to do this, that, and the other. And right now we're looking okay, or right now we really need to work on X. We'll do that with different topics through the rest of the year. And tonight, as I mentioned, we do have somebody from PSRC to talk to you here as well. Any questions?
Mr. Larson.
In the 1990s, I went through this with Pierce County when they rebuilt the comprehensive plan. It was an 18-month arduous task with about 30 people, all of whom had vested interest in one way or another. I later found out as to what should happen with certain properties and when and how everything fit. And it was really a huge task. So I want to see since there are 7 of us and 3 or 4 staff here with a very similar job that needs to be done in just a year and a half coming up, that maybe we see if there's some subcommittees that we could run to bring us back information, or how that might be configured in order to get really a thorough job done, because this is a really great opportunity to get Lakewood's direction established in a manner that's good for all concerned. And I think I really welcome it, but it is a huge detailed task, and that's all the details that make the end of the day Lakewood a better place to live. So I just wanted to kind of get that on the table.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Mr. Pearson Parson? No. Okay.
All right. If there's no questions, Paul Ingram is here this evening, and he is the head of the growth management portion of the Puget Sound Regional Council. So he is here to present a little bit more information about what they have already provided and will be providing as guidance to local governments, as well as the process to review the draft product once we get to mid-2024. So Paul, are you there, and are you able to share your screen?
I am here. I'm going to check on the screen sharing part here. I'm not sure I see a screen sharing option yet.
Okay, I'm going to promote you to, I'm promoting you to panelist. We'll see if that helps. I'll be right back.
I'm coming back, and I'm going to start a share screen. I'll do video. Oh, it doesn't want to do video, but that's okay. No, that's fine. Yeah, we're going to focus on the slides anyway. If I do, I'm going to have to do, let's see here. I have to stop for a second. I need to go full screen over there. Fine. Give me just 2 seconds. Okay, there. I think that'll work. How are we looking?
Good. It's fine. Yes. Welcome, Mr. Ingram.
Great. Well, thank you for having me and letting me come in remotely via technology. I appreciate it. I'm a little disappointed that I didn't make the trip down to be there. It looks like a lot of you are in person, and I'm enjoying getting out and actually seeing people in person these days. So, but nonetheless, we'll do it remotely. I was just listening to Tiffany, and by the way, Tiffany does just amazing work. We really enjoy working with her. You're in good hands, and hearing some of those comments, it's like, yeah, doing this big periodic update. It's a lot of work, a lot of heavy lifting. Some subcommittees might be a good thing to have. But also you've, I think, done 3 comp plan updates since you've incorporated, and your plan's in really good shape. So I think, you know, the optimistic view is like your plan's a really good plan. You have some great sub area plans as part of downtown and the station area. So you're starting at a really good level. There are some of these new requirements, expectations, especially around housing, like Tiffany was talking about, that may require still a lot of work to come. But unlike that time in the 90s that you were talking about, you're starting off in a really good beginning position here. So I'm again, my name's Paul Ingram. I'm the Director of Growth Management. I'll just talk to you a little bit about kind of the role of PSRC, Vision 2050, and some of the support that we can provide on the local plan updates. Feel free to ask me anything, and I'll do my best as we go along.
Great.
There we go. So Central Puget Sound. So when I talk about PSRC or the Central Puget Sound, we're talking about the 4 counties: King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Kitsap County. There are 82 cities out there, about 1,000 square miles of urban area. You know, we always love looking at Mount Rainier, right, on a nice clear day. And with Puget Sound Regional Council, the things that we think of is, you know, the top of Mount Rainier down to the Puget Sound. So all that different area is part of it. So a lot of different types of communities, from like a Carbonado to Seattle and so on. The regional Puget Sound Regional Council, we have what's called Vision 2050. Tiffany was talking about that a little bit. It's kind of like the comprehensive plan for the region. So it talks about transportation, mobility, environment, climate, housing, equity, jobs. We adopted that in October of 2020. It looks out to 2050. So it looks out a little bit beyond the planning period that you're looking for or forward to of 2044, to kind of provide an umbrella of like, okay, this is what's happening in the region. And it sets this projection of 5.8 million people for the region. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But like you were saying earlier, you know, year to year, you never know, you know, economic cycles, pandemics. Hopefully we won't have too many pandemics, but those different types of things affect individual years' growth. But over the long term, we still expect a lot of growth to hit the region. This is our graphic to try to think about how these things nest together. Of course, there's the Growth Management Act at the state level that sets the requirements for how we have to plan. At the regional level, we develop multi-county planning policies, a lot like your planning policies, but across the region. That's what makes up Vision 2050. Then, as Tiffany was saying, the city and the counties work together to have the county-wide planning policies and the growth targets. We were just talking about the growth targets. So that's happening at the county level. And then, of course, your work at the local level to put all that together and really kind of where the rubber hits the road of how do those policies connect to your development regulations, to your transportation projects and other aspects. And then, as Tiffany was saying, then it kind of comes back around to once you're done updating your plan, of submitting that to PSRC, and we go through a certification process, and usually that goes very smoothly. To kind of start at the beginning as to like, why do we do all this planning? There are lots of good reasons to do planning, but one of the key fundamental things is we just expect a lot more people in the region over the next 20, 30 years. As I said, even with some of the different impacts of economic cycles, and what's happening over the last couple of years, we still over the long term expect that growth. And you can see in this chart, one of the things that I find interesting is going back to 1970, that rate of growth has been pretty stable. It's varied city by city. Different areas have been kind of hot at different times, depending on the housing market and so on. But even as that job market, you can kind of see that the employment in the darker gray, greenish gray, it kind of wiggles around a little bit with the economic cycles and recessions and whatnot. But that the population curve, it's influenced by that to a degree, but it also has been remarkably stable over the long term. So as I was saying, Vision 2050 is the regional plan, but it's a lot like your comprehensive plan. It has some goals, as policies. We identify action steps that are both things that PSRC will do and things that we anticipate that cities and counties will do, implementing it. And then we have what's called a regional growth strategy. So it's this expectation of kind of where growth is going to go across the region, although it gets implemented through your targets and through your local plan. So you've already kind of gone to that next step with the targets. And it has a bunch of policy sections that are very similar to the types of chapters that you have in your comprehensive plan. It has key policy themes about housing, economy, transportation, very similar to types of things in individual comprehensive plans. The growth strategy is, I find very interesting, but it also gets a bit into the weeds. It looks at how can we take advantage of our infrastructure and try to encourage growth in places where we have jobs occurring, where we have transit and transportation investments occurring. How can we avoid growing where we have farms or forest or other productive lands? And how can we get to a better jobs housing balance? That traditionally we see a lot of job growth in King County and a lot of housing growth in Snohomish and Pierce County. And so trying to work with that to some degree is to getting more job growth in the other counties and vice versa with the housing. So trying to make some adjustments there. And so that works with both the types of cities and then also with our regional growth centers. And we'll talk about that in a second here. So previously, our plan was called Vision 2040, pretty easy name, naming system. Before we looked out to year 2040, we've updated that forecast to 2050. So now we call it Vision 2050. So that's the obvious big change. There was also, over the last 10 years, a lot of investments in transportation projects, light rail projects, BRT projects like the Pierce County BRT lines that are being developed, and also a bunch of new ferry projects like Kitsap County Ferries has developed several new fast ferries. So a bunch of new transportation investments, continuing to work on how to have that funding to support local investments and county investments to be more stable and sustainable. Sustainable meaning that we'll continue to have that funding available. One of the things is that Vision 2040 didn't say a whole lot about military installations or native tribes, so it tries to address those two groups better. Neither of them have to plan under GMA, but the more that our communities can coordinate with the military installations and the tribes, it seems better. Both, I mean, there's obvious traffic issues, there's housing issues. You know it well, working with JBLM as to the interrelationship and the dynamic there. There's an expanded section on climate change, looking at that. And it directs some additional regional work on housing and equity, which are resulting in regional housing strategy and a regional equity strategy to provide additional support and guidance on those two important issues in the region. So those are some of the things that are new. Here's the chart to try to help kind of graphically show how this stuff fits together. Back in 2020 was when we adopted Vision 2050. So that kind of set the foundation to a lot of our regional work. So the regional transportation plan was just adopted this year. The regional economic strategy was adopted in December of last year. And then, as I said, we've been working on a housing strategy and an equity strategy and other work We also, I'll talk about in a minute, our transportation funding process. So Vision 2050 provides us that kind of policy foundation for all of that work. And then it also provides that umbrella for the work that's then been happening with the countywide planning policies, the growth targets. So that's wrapping up. And now we're moving into that light green box of the local plan updates. And we're kind of in the middle there today. So that's Vision 2050. I'm going to do kind of a slow transition here of just, thought it would be important to talk about regional centers, recognizing that you have one there. So regional centers are something that PSRC designates throughout the region. We have 29 regional growth centers. So those tend to be downtowns like downtown Seattle, downtown Bellevue, downtown Lakewood, and a variety of other places. If you kind of scan across that map on the right-hand side, it also includes 10 manufacturing industrial centers. So the Port of Tacoma, Frederickson are ones in Pierce County, and we have a few others. Those regional centers are really useful at a regional level to be able to think about where is growth going to happen, where are transportation investments going to happen, so that we can ideally put the funding into the transportation projects that serve these hubs, and knowing that there's going to be a lot of work, that those will be places with jobs, with more housing, with arts and culture, government services, etc. Depending, each of these centers are different and unique, but that there are these hubs within each area that attract growth and attract development. There's this idea of density and growth expectations for the different types of regional growth centers. Lakewood's what we call an urban regional growth center, where it's planning for a combination of 45 people and jobs per acre within the regional center. And that's it. You can kind of see the comparisons there to Linwood or Redmond or the Capitol Hill area in Seattle. So I'm going to skip now to regional transportation plan. As I said, we just adopted this in the spring of this year, and it looks at essentially the combination of all the different transportation projects across the region. It creates a regional TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, similar to what you have at the local level, but it pulls all those projects together. It attempts to identify which projects are in the funded and likely to be built category versus those that are what we call unconstrained, that there is not funding identified for them yet. It looks at current and future and tries to model and anticipate how is growth going to occur and impact the transportation system over the long term. A key part that everybody cares about is funding that comes through PSRC and is tied to that regional transportation plan, so that PSRC distributes somewhere a little less than 300 million in transportation funding annually. So that includes both federal highways, federal transit projects. We have some areas of funding for rural town centers and also for special needs transportation. So we have a few different categories where that money gets split up, and there are competitive processes where cities work at the county level with what's TCC, the Transportation Coordinating Committee in Pierce County, and those projects across different cities are evaluated, and then some of those projects are recommended to PSRC for funding. And funding a large transportation project, or even a large one for a city, something like a street intersection or a new segment of street, they're often big, expensive projects that require multiple sources of funding. So 300 million really isn't that much money for the region, but when it's spread across so many different projects. But when you're putting together the funding for a project, you often are trying to pull together multiple different sources, and this can certainly be a big help at times. So now I want to do one last transition, and that's just to the type of support and assistance that we're working on right now at this time when you're thinking about your comprehensive plan update. So we call it Passport to 2044, trying to be a little bit cute about thinking about that year in 2044 and working towards it. We're coordinating with the State Department of Commerce and what's the Municipal Research Service Center, MRSC, two other public agencies. So the three of us together are trying to identify a variety of opportunities to support cities and counties. We had a June kickoff webinar that had about 300 participants. That's available on our website. It really just kind of talks about the plan updates in general. We have a series coming up. Some have been completed. So we did one on climate change and resilience in August, economic development, September 7th. There are links to those on our website. We have more that are scheduled. Some of them we're taking a lead on, some Commerce is taking a lead on. And there are a few that Commerce is doing separately that might be on specific kind of subtopics. So like I know that they have one just specifically about accessory dwelling units coming up that's not listed here. In addition to that, we have a website with lots of guidance and resources. Our intent is not to overwhelm you with a ton of documents and to spend all day, every day reading stuff, but we do want to have information available for your use as needed. You can see some of those are available now, some are still in draft form, and some are coming out in the future. We have a link to Vision 2050 planning resources that you can follow, and it'll provide those to you. They kind of fall into two buckets. One are element guides. So we have one on economic development and one on climate change. So they're a little bit deeper. They're not, we tried to keep them relatively short so that they're not overwhelming. So you can kind of cut straight to the information, get some good guidance. But they're really about, if you want to do an economic development element, what are the things you might look at and consider, and what's some of the data that's out there and available. We also have some that are shorter. These are only on the order of like 2 or 3 pages. So they're a little bit more compact. They're not about a whole element. They just kind of look at some of the specific topics. So these two about equitable engagement strategies and coordination with tribes. So some different thoughts, resources, suggestions, best practices that you might be able to use. We also have generated a newsletter, so we're going to do that for the next couple of years as you go through these plan updates. You can sign up at the link there, and then you'll get updates on when new webinars are coming out, when other resources are being available. So if you want an easy way to keep kind of track of what's the latest stuff out in the next couple of months, you can sign up for that newsletter. So thank you very much for your time on this beautiful evening, and want to just let you know that we're available to try to help and support as much as we can during this process.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ingram, for your presentation. Very informative. And do you have any questions from fellow commissioners? I see none at this time. I don't see anyone raising their hand on Zoom. So again, thank you so much. And we'll definitely take some advantage of all the resources that you have provided, and links and newsletters and all of the outreach that you have done. So thank you again. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Great. Okay, any other reports?
Not from me, Mr. Chair. You do have Councilmember Boki on remote, so he might
Yep.
have an update
I
for
will
you.
ask Mr. Boki as well. Mr. Councilman Boki, are you online and have any updates?
I am. Thank you very much. Good work tonight. Welcome to this update, which has been complicated a little bit by state law, but we look forward to working with it. I think I actually think Lakewood will actually do real well with some of those things that we're being asked to do. Just quick, you're probably wondering where the tree ordinance is at, or the tree retention ordinance. We're still working on it. We've had one study session, very productive study session. We had our public hearing a couple of weeks ago, and then we had a really productive study session last week. So we're continuing to work through that. And so I don't have a final date for that. I think there's a final date on our schedule, but but we're working through it. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. So far, so good.
All right.
And that's all I've got.
Any questions for Mr. Boki? Mr. Larson?
I have a suggestion, not a suggestion, but a moment of gratitude for the new street coverings that we've been able to put down on South Tacoma Way. And it's really improving the whole area down in front of JBLM McCord on 112th Street out all the way to Steele. And it's just really improving the city. The completion of the Gravelly Lake Drive roundabout. It's just really been nice at the end of this summer to see all that work and inconvenience of drivers and everything like that coming together. And so thank you, Mr. Balke, for helping the city make that happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Larson. Yeah, I noticed that today at least on the South Tacoma Way portion between 108th and 512 that was all in, and I'm glad to see that. We did have a problem. I think one of the asphalt paving trucks that came in actually hit somewhere along the way, hit one of the traffic light things and knocked it down. So we had to put up temporary traffic lights or poles, and a number of people were involved in trying to get that done. So not just with the city, but with the electric, I think Amaya Electric came out there and various things like that. So it wasn't without some casualties, but I'm glad you like it. And we still have some other projects going on as we head into fall.
Great. And I also want to commend the council and the staff of the parks for the farmers market. I think, that was a really hit, having it out there at the park area and all the activities. So that was, well received, and a lot of people, citizens, have taken advantage of that. So pass that on to the council as well.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you very much, Chair Daniels.
Yep, no problem. Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Tiffany.
If there's nothing else from the commission, just a quick note that next meeting will be on October 5th, but it won't be in this room. The council is starting its budget process, so they will be in here at the same time you're meeting. You will be in American Lake, which is the very first meeting room inside the double doors. So you'll still be on the first floor. Just come in there. We'll have that meeting on October 5th.
Great. Mr. Buer, you have any closing comments, or you?
We'll get back to you on the meeting location because I was told something slightly different.
Okay.
I was told that the commission is going to keep this room and the council is going to be in the other room. We'll figure it out.
Okay. All right, no problem. Mr. Estrada.
As you may know, the Library Advisory Committee is meeting on the 30th at the Telecom Library. And at the same time, they're going to tour that piece of property that the city purchased for them on Union. And I asked a question a few months ago. Well, first of all, Ms. Brewer, do we know whether anybody from the city has been invited to explain the site, amenities there, utilities there, and specifically trees, the type of trees that we have there? Do you know if anybody has come from the city?
I know that Becky Newton's been attending all of those meetings. I believe she has the site details for the proposed library site. Yes.
Okay, then I'll speak with her.
Mr. Larson.
If you have specific questions about that site, I'm intimately familiar with it and be happy to answer them for you.
You're intimate.
Yes. I sold it to the city.
Thank you.
All right, hearing or seeing no other questions, let's see, Parsons, Pearsons, any questions? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Pearson.
No, I was just saying nope.
Oh, okay. No problem. Thank you so
None
much.
for me either. Thanks.
Thank you both. The double Ps there. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we'll call the meeting adjourned.